Good morning and welcome to another cognitive bias video. This one is all about the Dunning-Kruger effect. So let me start by saying thank you so much to everyone who's watching this back on the replay. If you are watching on the replay, let me know in the comments where and when you're watching from, because it's always good to know where and when people are consuming my content. Tristan, good morning. Great to have you here. You're excited for this one. Good to hear. So the chances are most of you watching this have probably already heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect. I would expect. It is certainly one of the most popular and most spoken about cognitive biases. And I'm guessing most of you have probably heard something about how it initially came about and what sparked the intrigue in it that led to Dunning and Kruger experimenting and looking into it to discover more about it. But for anyone who doesn't, I think it's a lovely story, so I'm going to share it with you now. So there was this chap, American chap, and he saw, he found out that lemon juice specifically was used to create invisible ink. Now, it's a really fun little trick that you can try if you're staying at home at the minute and you've got kids around and you want to do something to engage with them. You get lemon juice and you dip something in it and use that to write on a piece of paper, and you can't see it. It's invisible ink until you heat it up. And then when you expose it to heat, so waving it over a candle is a great example, then the lemon juice becomes visible and you can read what's been written. Really fun. So this guy discovered that lemon juice was used as invisible ink, and he thought, fantastic. So off he went, and this guy was a bank robber, or decided to be, and he went in and he broke into this bank and he stole a load of money, walked away with it, even smiling at the camera on his way out, walked to the next bank and did the same again, and then later that afternoon was promptly arrested. Rather unsurprisingly to us, but he was completely shocked. See, what he had done was he had covered his face in lemon juice. Because he heard that lemon juice was used as invisible ink, he thought, well, if I cover my face in invisible ink, I'll be invisible. Good morning to Elia, good morning to Mr. Chisholm. Great to see you all tuning in. So now we know, I'm sure everyone watching this knows, that covering your face in lemon juice does not make you invisible. But he had learned a little bit of information, and he ran away with it and got carried away. And he actually did take a photo of himself to check that he was invisible. The only thing is the photo that he took. Yeah, isn't it brilliant, Tristan? So the photo that he took of himself, he ended up out of the screen, so he wasn't actually in the photo that he took of himself. It's not like these days with smartphones where you use the front-facing camera and it's really easy. So he had turned his camera around to take a photo, missed his own face, looked at it and went, it worked, I'm invisible, and went and robbed a bank, 2 banks, and then was absolutely shocked when he got caught because he was convinced he was invisible. Now, I think that's a brilliant story and probably like the best description of the Dunning-Kruger effect in play. So a famous quote, I don't even know where it came from or who said it, but a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. And you see it time and time again. Another great example of this is with what's known as eye accessing cues. So it's an NLP technique. NLP is a great example of this. If you know a little bit, then people make big assumptions. Body language as well. So, you know, that whole, oh, if you look up and to this side, that means that someone's using the creative side of their brain, so they must be making it up. Well, there's some truth to that, but actually it's been disproven many times over as well. There's way more to it than just it being as simple as that. But when people learn this basic stuff, they start to make assumptions on much bigger stuff. Another great example of this is obviously closed body language. This says, I don't want to talk to you, I'm not interested. Absolutely, it does, correct. But it also could just be that the person's cold or that they're just comfortable standing that way. And people who know a little bit about body language will pick up potentially, especially at the point at which they're beginning to learn about it, or they've just read about it, or whatever it might be. They'll look at something like that and see someone standing like this and go, oh, well, that person has closed body language. They're clearly not interested in what I have to say. But actually, it could just be that they are cold. And the thing is, we see this time and time again. So those of you who are watching, and I can see only a few of you have commented, but I can see there's lots more watching. So if you're feeling brave, it's not that brave. You can do it. You're in a safe place here. Let me know in the comments, interact and say hello. So what I want to ask you now is, who here believes that they're a better than average driver? I'm not saying that you need to be Nigel Mansell, or I don't know why I chose him. I'm not saying that you need to be the best driver out there, but who here believes that they're at least slightly better than average? Good morning, Lucy. Thanks for tuning in. Great to always see you here. Yeah, so do you believe that you're better than average as a driver? Yes, if you think you're at least marginally better than average. No, if you believe you're average or below. Great. Oh, morning, Elena. Yeah, so Lucy, thank you for answering that. You believe you're greater than average. James Chisholm believes he's greater than average. He's got a new car now, so at least he's not riding around in his clapped out old Rover, driving slightly above average. Yet to pass your test due to COVID. Well, then you can't quite join in with this one, but I'm sure you'll be a great driver when you do get to take your test. I'm sure you'll pass with flying colours and do really well. Just remember to stay calm and breathe. That is the key. It's all down to confidence. Okay, cool. So everyone who's answered here, thank you, Claire. I'm average. My skills are good, but I'm always thinking about other stuff while I'm driving, which makes me less aware. Well done for that honesty. Thank you for sharing that. Absolutely. That is more common than most people will admit for themselves. Good morning, Facebook user. Yes, you do need to learn to drive first, but we'll speak about that separately. Anyway, so the vast majority of people, as highlighted here, believe themselves to be better than average as a driver. In most circumstances and situations, there are exceptions to this. You ask people if they believe themselves to be more intelligent, and overwhelmingly, the majority of people believe themselves to be more intelligent than average. I'll come to that in a bit. So yes, those of you that are saying that you're better than average drivers, by definition, some of you must be wrong. Because if everyone's better than average, then the average is better than you're perceiving it to be. But don't worry, don't beat yourself up for it. Most people believe themselves to be better. And it can be useful to have that level of confidence. I mean, Trump's done quite well from being ridiculously overconfident. Not that I wasn't planning on mentioning politics in this example at all, but there we go. I did it. So yeah, most people believe themselves to be better than the average driver, but it's not possible for everyone to be better than average. The thing is, when we look at and assess our abilities in something like how good we are at driving, we tend to think about, well, the opposite of Claire's example. So again, thanks, Claire, for that. It's a brilliant example, is that most people will then think about the times when they're paying attention to and intending to drive well, and they'll compare that to the times when they notice other people. And they only really notice other people when they're driving badly or causing a hazard or an issue. You think about how many cars you pass on a daily basis, and you just barely even notice that they're there, aside from in the moment when you're negotiating your way through the road. But it's only when someone drives poorly that you notice them. If someone's driving really, really well, you're not going to notice that because it doesn't impact you. You're going to just drive past or be driven past or whatever it might be. But when someone's driving badly, you have no choice but to notice it, because otherwise it's a potential risk to your life. So there's another cognitive bias at play there, actually, which is you've got cognitive differentiation going on there. So that those bad drivers you're looking for and you notice and you pay attention to, so you remember them and you forget all the others because those ones are more relevant. Check back on my previous videos, and I'm sure I've already done one about that. Okay, so let's go back to the Dunning-Kruger effect and look at that in a bit more detail. So I've even made this pretty little graph. Let me get rid of my logo there so you can see it better. There we go. So here's this pretty little graph over that side there. And this is effectively what it looks like. So this is what the Dunning-Kruger effect is all about. It's confidence in your ability versus your competence, your actual ability. And what tends to happen is when people learn a little bit, they go, oh, this is great. I know all about this. And so you see that very sharp start. Realize everything's in mirror, so I need to go the opposite direction. You notice that very sharp increase in confidence without much increase in competence, and that's affectionately known as Mount Stupid. So at the peak of that first mountain, that peak, you're there on the top of Mount Stupid. You feel like you know everything, but you don't necessarily actually know very much at all. That's where people make assumptions that they know more than they do, and they make mistakes. Really common. Everyone does it. Don't beat yourself up for it if you found yourself doing it as well. What happens next is, and so particularly if you then choose to study it and look into it further, is you hit this valley of despair as you become more competent. Now, anyone who's seen me talking about the emotional cycle of change and that side of things will be familiar with me talking about the valley of despair. And you'll notice it's a very similar curve in some ways, but more about that another time. So as you hit this valley of despair, this is where you start to learn more, and you're becoming more competent as you learn more, but you realize how much you don't know. It's like there's a brilliant expression about quantum physics, that if you feel like you understand quantum physics, then you've not truly understood quantum physics. That's a perfect description of what happens in this moment, is you suddenly realize just how much more there is to know about this subject that you don't know. But back when you first learn snippets of it and find out bits of information, you feel like an expert because you've just learned something new, and it gets you feeling excited about this new knowledge that you have. And it's easy to run away with that, even though you don't necessarily know very much at all. So then in this valley of despair, you start to realize just how much there is to learn, and you feel like you begin to believe that you're less competent than you really are. So you've experienced imposter syndrome before, right? If not, if you don't know what that is, then there's on my YouTube channel, there's a 10-minute video that kind of explains it and how you can overcome it. And if you do know what it is and it's something that you have struggled with and want more help with, join my group, Empower Yourself and Others, and you'll find in there, there is details at the bottom of the screen, you'll find in that group, if you search for I Don't Belong Here, there's an hour-long video. So set aside some time for it that goes into detail about what imposter syndrome really is and how to overcome it and work through that. So that's kind of what happens in this valley of despair. You get this imposter syndrome where you start to feel like you don't know very much. And what happens, interestingly enough, often in this point, is you look back to the peak of Mount Stupid, and you look at those people that don't know very much but are really confident in what they do know, and you go, wow, these people are so much better than me. But they're not. They're not better than you. They're just more confident, and that's often because they know less than you and they've got less experience. Because as you grow in experience, you begin to initially, normally, dip in confidence. But then as you begin to learn more, as you become more settled in your understanding, as you explore the breadth, not just the depth of that subject, that's when you begin to feel more confident again, but actually with competence. And then that's the slope of enlightenment, which leads up to the plateau of sustainability. Cheesy names, right? But so you get the idea. You have this initial peak of confidence with little competence, then you have a crash of confidence as your competence grows, and then eventually, if you continue through, then it balances out on this lovely plateau where you can just continue to learn more. Hope you like my pretty little graph. Right, so now that we understand the Dunning-Kruger effect, Now that you can see, and let me know in the comments if you've experienced that, if it seems familiar to you now, because it's one of those things, as with many cognitive biases actually, that it's much easier to spot biases in other people than it is in yourself. In fact, there's a whole cognitive bias that talks about how we are less likely to notice bias in ourselves. We believe ourselves to be less susceptible to cognitive biases than others. But yeah, that's a whole other thing, right? So it's much easier to notice it in other people, but it's important to notice it in ourselves. So what can we do to improve ourselves, to avoid getting trapped in the effects of the Dunning-Kruger impact, and to work our way through it? Well, very simply, step one, as with all of the biases that I talk about, is be aware of it. Know that it exists. When you know that it exists, you have a much better chance of overcoming it, avoiding it, controlling for it, working around it, whatever you want to say. A great example of this is salesmen. Salesmen will give you enough information to make it seem like you know lots, and then they'll feed on that excitement and that confidence and help you to believe, and they don't necessarily do this intentionally, it's just part of their job, hyping something up, lead you to believe that you do know what you're talking about and that you're making an informed choice rather than just an emotional choice because you want the shiny new pretty thing. So there's a great example of a situation and scenario where, being aware of it, you can take a step back, take a bit more time to make an informed decision and not an emotional, excited decision. The other thing that you can do to work around this, to improve the impact that it has, is to just keep learning. Keep learning, be hungry for more knowledge and more information. Because the more you do that, the more you'll get past this initial peak. And the next step then, of course, is if you notice that you're beginning to feel inadequate or less aware than you'd like to be, or inexperienced, or like other people, like below average, stop and have a think and look. The chances are you're comparing yourself with people who are more confident, but that doesn't mean they're more competent. And keep learning, and you'll get you'll work your way out of that with an even greater knowledge. So if you ever feel like you're not competent about something that you want to be competent with, just keep pushing on, keep learning more. So being aware of it, keep learning. And the other thing is to recognize and realize that reading a couple of articles on the internet or listening to the view of a few people that's been thrown out on social media does not make you an expert. And it will never make you an expert. Reading articles from both sides will give you a better chance. The more information you consume, the more you're likely to know, but it needs to be from a variety of sources, and you need to look at where those sources come from. Your mates down the pub probably don't know as much as they think they do because they're probably experiencing the Dunning-Kruger effect. They're very confident in their knowledge, but their knowledge doesn't come from viable sources. It comes from what they read on Facebook or whatever it might be, or what their mate down a different pub said. And before you know it, you can find yourself buying into this same thing, learning that little bit of information and becoming absolutely rooted in your stance on something, particularly if you already feel a certain way and then someone comes along and says something that appears evidential, which supports your existing belief. And this is confirmation bias. Again, another video that I've done, check it out. But in that situation, it's very easy to then believe that you know more than you do because you've absorbed the knowledge, the information, the study, whatever it might be, that sides with your own existing bias and expectation. Not that any of that, of course, is at all relevant to anything that's happening right now. James Chisholm loves the mate down the pub that knows about accountancy. This is a great example. So for those who don't know, James Chisholm is actually an accountant. And yeah, I've experienced firsthand his reaction and response to some of the ludicrous things that he hears that either clients or other people's clients have done, because not that made it sound like he tells me about his clients. That's not very accurate. But stories that he hears from other accountants and things that he's encountered in the past where people have made some rather questionable choices and decisions because their mate down the pub said you should. So if either get an accountant or talk to someone like James, or if it's something that is important to you and you want to do a better job of like your bookkeeping, I've got a friend, Alison Mead, I'll give her a shout out, who trains people to be their own bookkeeper even better. So yeah, accounting is a great example, though. It's something that people can start to know a little bit about, hear stuff from their mate down the pub, and then suddenly they believe they're an expert, go ahead, get on with it all, and then it comes to just before the deadline and they're suddenly getting in touch with an accountant to fix the mess that they've created. I've seen that happen. Okay, so that is the Dunning-Kruger effect. And a great example. So one thing I didn't mention right at the beginning is when Dunning-Kruger heard about the lemon juice on the face man, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, watch back to the start of the video. Brilliant story. One of the studies that they did to check this out, one of the initial ones, was to ask engineers where they placed themselves in terms of their ability. And 42% of engineers over a few different firms ranked themselves as being in the top 5%. I don't know how good your maths is. James Chisholm can help me out here because he's the numbers man. But I don't think 42% of people can possibly be in the top 5% of people. That doesn't really work. So there's so many great examples of this in real life at play, and they don't all relate to politics and coronavirus. Anyway, I'm going to stop it there before it gets any more political. Thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. Really appreciate you being here. Tune in again next week, Thursday at 9 o'clock, either on Facebook, via my Facebook page, in my Facebook group, on YouTube, wherever you want to join from. It'll be great to see you there. Thursdays at 9 o'clock, where I explore new cognitive biases. And in the meantime, check out relaxclub.online. Some exciting changes coming and working their way there at the minute. A whole new website being built around it to make it even better than it was before. But until the new website is up and running, we're stuck with the old one, which is working still and has everything it needs. It's just not quite as pretty and not quite as smooth. And isn't going to have as much amazing additional functionality as the new one. But while we're with the old website, you can still grab a free trial. So now's the perfect time to jump in and check that out. Relaxclub.online. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and I'll see you all next week. Have a great day.